In March 1941, a wheat farmer named Tom Whitfield from Forbes in central New South Wales sat at his kitchen table on a Tuesday night with a notebook in front of him. He had 3 days before the train left for Sydney and the troop ship to North Africa. The notebook had 25 pages already filled, 1 item per page, in pencil. Hit subscribe right now, because what you are about to learn is the kind of preparation that built the country that came home. Tom Whitfield did not come home. He died at Tobruk in May 1941. His wife Eileen kept the notebook in the top drawer of her dressing table for 53 years and used it almost every day for the 4 years that followed his departure. Stories like Tom's were not unusual. Almost 1 million Australian men served in the Second World War. Almost every one of them left someone behind. And in the final weeks before they shipped out, men sat at kitchen tables across this continent and taught everything they knew. These 25 lessons were never written into any official army pamphlet. They were given by men in their 20s and 30s who had never thought of themselves as people with much to teach, to women who had never thought of themselves as people who would need to know any of this. Number 25. How to read the rationing book. By 1942, every Australian household had a tea coupon book and a clothing coupon book and a butter coupon book. The diggers walked their wives through every page before they left. They pointed out which coupons expired when. They explained which grocer at the country store would honor the rules to the letter and which one would slip you an extra ounce of butter under the counter if you were quiet about it. The women who learned this fed their families through 4 years of austerity. The women who guessed went short. Number 23. How to keep a victory garden alive through summer. By 1943, victory gardens had been planted in every backyard from Cottesloe to Coffs Harbour. Planting was the easy bit. Keeping a tomato bed alive through 40-degree January heat was something else. The diggers taught how to read the soil moisture by digging a thumb end to the second knuckle. They taught when to water, at sunset, never at midday. They drew companion planting maps on the back of butcher's paper. The women who followed the maps ate fresh vegetables all summer. Number 23. How to dispatch and dress a chook for Sunday dinner. In wartime Australia, protein often came from the backyard. The job of turning a live bird into a meal had usually been the man's, now it was the woman's. The diggers taught the cleanest method. The bird was held by the legs, the neck was stretched against a stump, and dispatched in a single clean stroke. The carcass was scalded in a copper of boiling water for exactly 90 seconds, any longer and the skin tore, and the feathers came off in handfuls. The whole process took a competent woman 15 minutes by the end of the war. Number 22. How to keep the chook flock laying through winter. Chooks naturally drop their lay in cold months. A flock that produced 14 eggs a day in November might give 5 in July. The diggers who had grown up on country properties knew the tricks. 14 hours of light a day was the threshold. A small kerosene lamp hung in the chook shed for 3 hours after sundown kept the hens laying through the worst of June and July. Crushed oyster shell mixed into the feed kept the shells hard. Warm mash in the morning kept body temperature up. Women who applied it ate eggs through every winter of the war. Number 21. How to write letters past the censor. Every letter to a digger overseas was opened by an Australian Army censor. One wrong detail, a place name, a unit number, and the offending sentence was inked out. Couples worked out private codes before the man left. A reference to your mother's recipe might mean one thing, a particular phrase about the children another. The diggers explained that fear could not be written directly. The censor would read it and the letter would be flagged. Instead, fear had to live in the gaps between the lines. Whole conversations across 2 continents took place in those gaps for 4 years. Number 20. How to keep the wood stove burning through a country winter. Most country Australian houses ran on a wood stove. The stove cooked the meals, heated the water, dried the washing, and kept the kitchen warm enough through July to be the room the family lived in. The diggers showed how to bank the coals at night so the kitchen was still warm at 5 in the morning. They showed how to split kindling thin enough that a damp morning fire would catch on the first match. They taught which woods burned hot, ironbark, red gum, and which burned slow, yellow box, peppermint. They showed how to clean the flue once a month so a chimney fire did not start at 3 in the morning. Number 19. How to keep the family vehicle running. Petrol was rationed from 1940.
New tires were almost impossible to get after 1942. The diggers taught their wives the basics: how to check the oil with the dipstick under the bonnet of the Holden, how to top up the radiator with rainwater from the tank, how to change a tire at the side of a dirt road in the dark using nothing but a jack handle and a spanner. They taught these lessons by doing them once with the woman watching, then asking her to do them while they stood there. The skill lived in the hands. Number 18. How to deal with creditors and the bank. Most Australian families in 1941 still carried Depression-era debt: mortgages, hire purchase agreements, accounts running at the country store. When a man enlisted, his army pay was fixed and small. The diggers explained the priority order: mortgage first, always, council rate second.
The country store account third. Everything else negotiable. They explained how to write a letter to the bank manager that was respectful but firm. Some husbands sat their wives down and said plainly, "He will wait." That conversation changed how some families survived the war. Number 17. How to butcher and salt cure a side of mutton. Country properties usually killed a sheep every fortnight for the family meat. With the man gone, the woman had to take over. The diggers taught the whole job: how to hang the carcass from the meat house rafter for 24 hours to set, how to break it down into shoulders, legs, and chops with a sharp knife and a small bone saw, how to salt cure the legs in a stoneware crock with coarse salt and brown sugar for 3 weeks until the meat was firm and dark and would keep for 6 months in a cool pantry. By 1944, every country wife in Australia who had a flock could break down a sheep in under an hour. Number 16. How to deal with the Army welfare officer at the door. Every Australian Army district had welfare officers whose job was to check on the families of deployed men, deliver bad news when it had to be delivered, and offer help when help was wanted. The diggers told their wives what to expect. The welfare officer would ask after the kids. He would ask if the Army pay was coming through. He would not necessarily come bearing bad news, but bad news only ever came through him or through the telegram. The diggers said, "Be polite, answer his questions, never be ashamed to ask for what was needed." The welfare officer was not a charity. He was a service the digger had paid for with his enlistment. Number 15. How to handle the telegram boy on the bicycle. Every Australian country town in 1941 had a telegram delivery system. A boy on a bicycle, usually 15 or 16, carried the yellow envelopes from the post office to the houses. During the war, the sight of that bicycle turning up your front path made every wife stop breathing. The diggers told their wives what to do, not in those words. They said, "If something happens, send for your sister. The insurance papers are in the top left drawer. The neighbor Mackenzie will sit with the children." Some men wrote letters to be opened only if they did not come home. Number 14. How to keep the children calm when you are not. The diggers had observed that children watched their mothers the way kelpies watched the sky for weather. A frightened mother produced frightened children. A mother who held her face steady gave her children something to hold on to. The advice was uncomfortable. Do not let them see you read the war news. Keep the dinner routine the same every night. If they have a question about Daddy, answer one a day, honestly, and then close the subject. If you are going to cry, cry after they are asleep. This was not coldness. It was the knowledge of men who had grown up in the Depression and remembered watching a parent's face go blank with fear. We are in the last third now. Remember number 1. Number 13. How to identify a kerosene fume leak, a chimney fire, and a copper boiler about to fail. The diggers walked through every part of the house, pointing at the systems that could fail. Kerosene leaks smelled distinctly of paraffin. If you smelled it, do not strike a match. Open the windows, get the children out first. The chimney could ignite if it had not been swept in 3 months. The signs were a roar that grew louder, sparks coming out the top, and an unusually hot stove. If it happened, push wet hessian down the flue from above. The copper boiler in the laundry could fail if the water level dropped while the fire underneath was still going. The signs were a pinging sound from the metal. Drop the fire, drain the boiler, replace it before it was used again. Number 12. How to ask for help without apologizing for needing it. This was the lesson that came from men who had watched their own mothers struggle through pride. They told their wives directly, if something breaks, ask the Mackenzies. If the money runs short, ask the church. If you are sick and the kids need watching, call my sister, and mean it when you call her. The war has changed what it means to need help. Everyone needs help. Ask for it. Some men giving this advice had never asked for help themselves in their own lives.
They gave it anyway because they wanted the person they were leaving to survive better than they had survived their own losses. Number 11. How to read the Army pay allotment and fight a bureaucratic mistake. The Australian Army allotment system was not simple. A digger designated a portion of his pay to be sent home. The amount changed based on rank, time in service, and dependence. Errors happened constantly. Fixing them required writing letters to offices in Melbourne or Canberra that could take 6 weeks to respond. The diggers left their wives the service number, the rank, the allotment amount, and the address to write to if the figure on the bank book was wrong. They said, "Keep a copy of every letter you send. Keep a copy of every letter you receive." Pattern break. The Australian Army surveyed returning veterans in 1946 about what they had missed most overseas. Most men did not say a steak or a hot bath. They said the small things. The sound of a particular voice on the veranda. A particular meal made a particular way. The smell of a house they had been responsible for. Number 10. How to read the country for a coming dust storm. On country properties west of the Great Dividing Range, dust storms could appear with a few hours' notice. A bad one could kill chooks, ruin a vegetable garden, and choke a child's lungs. The diggers had been raised on these properties and knew the signs. A red haze on the horizon at 4 in the afternoon.
The diggers thought about this carefully. They wrote letters to be given to the kids on specific birthdays, telling them why the man who was away wanted them to finish their schooling. They told their wives plainly, "Do not let him leave at 13, no matter how much help you need." They worked out arrangements with the country headmaster, a payment of a few shillings a week for boots and books, paid out of the army allotment. The mothers who held the line on schooling produced the post-war generation that built a country. Number 7. How to use the rifle and when to use it. A woman alone with children in country districts where the nearest copper was 40 miles away was being asked to manage a real safety concern. .22 rifle for rabbits and the occasional fox in the chook yard. The husband had used it, now she had to. The lesson was careful: how to load the magazine, how to check whether it was loaded, where to store it so an adult could reach it quickly and a child could not reach it at all. The men emphasized judgment over mechanics. The lesson was not how to shoot anything. The lesson was how to be a person who held the capability and understood the gravity of the capability, and would use it calmly if she had to, and would not use it if she did not. Number 6. How to negotiate with a country town landlord. Rental housing was tight near war production centres. The Commonwealth eventually imposed rent controls in defence areas, but enforcement was uneven. The diggers who rented told their wives exactly what the lease said. They said what a landlord could legally require and what a landlord could not. They said, "You do not need me here to read a contract. You do not need to apologize for pushing back on something wrong because it feels rude. The lease is the lease." This lesson was inseparable from a wider one about authority. Wartime Australia was full of people in positions of small authority who assumed a woman alone would not know her rights. The diggers gave the opposite message. You know what is right. Say so clearly. If they do not hear you, say it again. Only the heaviest hitters left. Number 1 is close. Number 5. How to keep a household account that knew where every shilling went. Military households during the war ran on fixed army pay that did not flex. There was no second income, no overtime, no credit. Every shilling had to be tracked. The diggers who had handled the money sat down with their wives at the kitchen table and built the system together, sometimes for the first time in the marriage. Income on one side, fixed expenses on the other, a column for variables, a separate tin or envelope for each category, labeled in pencil, kept in the kitchen drawer. The envelope system was the only way that worked when every shilling was already spoken for. Women who learned this and used it managed their households through 4 years of war without falling into debt. Number 4. How to be a person the children could grow into. This was rarely said out loud. It was given in the form of smaller lessons. Be fair. Be honest with the kids when honesty was safe, and protective when it was not. Do not make promises you cannot keep. When you are wrong, say so. Some men wrote it out in letters meant only to be opened if they did not come home. They wrote about what they hoped the kids would become. Honesty, patience, a sense of humor in hard times, the willingness to work without certainty of reward. These letters were written in plain language by men in their 20s and 30s, in a hurry, often at night.
They are among the most important documents of 20th century Australia. Number 3. How to grieve and keep moving. This was the hardest lesson, and most diggers could not give it directly. They gave it sideways. Some gave it in the language of their own previous losses. My old man died when I was 12, and Mom kept us together. She did not pretend it was fine. She said it was hard. She said we were going to make it anyway. That is all you have to do. Say it is hard. Say we are going to make it anyway. The diggers who had thought carefully about what they were leaving behind tried to give something that would hold up under weight. Number 2. Where everything important was kept. The insurance policy, the deed to the property or the rental agreement, the birth certificates, the savings book.
The name of the country town solicitor who had drawn up the will itself. The diggers who had never organized their papers organized them in the week before they shipped out. They sat at desks and gathered everything into one place. They put it in a fireproof box or a heavy envelope or a specific drawer. They told their wives where it was and what each document was. This sounds small. It was not small. Women who knew where the documents were moved through the worst possible news with something to hold, a set of instructions, a next step. Grief is more survivable when it is not accompanied by complete disorientation. And the diggers who understood this gave their families the gift of a map when the territory became unrecognizable. And number 1, how to believe he was coming back. The final lesson was not practical. It was an act of will. The diggers who gave it knew it was an act of will, and they gave it anyway because the alternative was to leave their families anticipating loss. Not as a promise they could keep, because they could not promise it, but as the posture they chose and the posture they asked their families to share. They made plans that extended past the war. In April of 1944, a digger stationed in New Guinea wrote to his wife in Forbes to remind her not to plant the lemon tree yet because he wanted to plant it himself when he came home, and he had been thinking for 6 months about the right spot beside the tank stand.
He came home in November 1945, and they planted it that spring. The lesson was this: maintain the future. Keep making plans that require his presence. Do not pack his things away. Keep a place at the table that says, "This is temporary. He is in transit. He is coming back." Hundreds of thousands of Australian families held that posture for 4 years. Most of the time, they were right. When they were not, the posture itself had given them something to live inside, a version of normal that kept the kids fed and the garden growing and the wood stove burning and the accounts balanced, and that turned out to be exactly the preparation required for whatever came next. These 25 lessons were never taught in any school and never printed in any pamphlet. They passed from one person to another at kitchen tables, in backyard gardens, on country railway platforms in the 5 minutes before the troop train pulled out. They were given by men in their 20s to women who had never thought of themselves as people who would need to know any of this. The country we live in now was built on both, on what the diggers brought back and on what they had left behind. Share in the comments which lesson mattered most. If your pop or your nan kept a wartime notebook or a kitchen table letter, leave the story below, because this history lives in the details, and the details are running out of people to remember them, lest we forget.